This is Research Like a Pro, episode 261, Malissa Welch, Correcting Incorrect Parents. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go! Today's episode is brought to you by findagrave.com, the best place to search online for burial information for your family, friends, and famous people. At Find a Grave, you'll find details about cemeteries and individual memorials for the people buried in those cemeteries. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Research Like a Pro today.
Hi, Nicole. How are you doing?
Fabulous. And you? What are you working on?
Well, I was returning to my Hobson-Milner through line that's incorrect for Cynthia Dillard and looking at some of the matches there again and doing some work on evaluating those, trying to see why people are continuing to have him as a possible father for her in their trees. And it's so interesting because now with the new side view technology, you can see which side not only your DNA match is on, but also all the shared matches with them. So, one of my key test takers is Lucretia, who I've talked about before. And she has some of these odd through lines, and I was looking at those again. And it was very interesting because the Dillard-Royston line is on her maternal side, and a lot of these matches were on various sides. So say, for instance, she had a match, and I was looking at shared matches between her and this match to see if they were part of a genetic network, and half of them were one side and half of them were the other side. They weren't even all the same. So anyway, it was just a little interesting to see how that was playing out.
Such a great use for a side view to help us find these through lines that have both sides, and clearly that's wrong.
Yes, and one of them had a whole different common ancestor suggested for this group of matches. One of them only had 2 shared matches, and they were really small, just so many different scenarios. So it's always kind of fun to go and try to disprove as well as prove an ancestry through line. So anyway, I was revisiting that a bit.
Right. Well, we're excited for this month. We have our Research Like a Pro case study with Alice Childs. She's an accredited genealogist on our team who will be sharing her case study, who were the parents of David R. Matheson. And she will be talking about his immigration from Nova Scotia to California, where he later married and had children and died young at age 42, and then discovering who his parents were, because like it always is, there's a lot known about his later life and not much known about his early life. So it'll be neat to see how she used DNA to identify his ancestral family. And of course, our Research Like a Pro study group is this fall, and registration is ongoing. So if you'd like to join us, please register. We'd love to have you. And we'd love to have those with experience with the Research Like a Pro process join us as a peer group leader with complimentary registration. And you'll be responsible for giving feedback to about 5 or 6 other peers. And please join our newsletter to receive updates about our new content and any sales or discounts that we have going on. We'd love to see you at some of the upcoming conferences. The Association of Professional Genealogists Conference is coming up in October, and they have a virtual option, and then they have the in-person option in Salt Lake City. So that would be fun to see you there.
Well, let's get to our topic for the day. Today we are going to talk about correcting a set of incorrect parents for Malissa Welch Harris, who is one of my great-great-grandmothers and has been a brick wall, or was a brick wall, and we have since broken through part of her line. And we're just going to talk all about how we made some mistakes as baby genealogists. We were pretty good, I feel like, Nicole, as we were analyzing and putting our family trees together. But this one was a tricky one, and I think that we have some logical reasons for why we attached the wrong parents to poor Melissa. And I had written about this previously, and I think we probably even did a podcast about this previously when we were talking about her but she is one of the ancestors that you worked on and actually figured out the correction. So it's always fun to talk about her since she's one of our ancestors we both researched.
Yeah, and part of the tricky part was confusion about what her name was. So that can often be why there is a question.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in this podcast.
Right. Well, early in the Welch research, a distant cousin had sent us some scanned pages from the Harris family Bible. And that Bible included a lot of helpful births, marriage, and deaths. So this was wonderful because before that time period, there weren't very many births recorded. And this was on the frontier in the American West. So a family source like a family Bible is so providential. And the Bible pages listed Melissa's birth and death dates. So that was great. And her marriage to John C. Harris and the births of her children. So it said that Malissa Welch Harris was born on 10 September 1844. Soon after her birth, her parents, George and Lucinda Welch, began their migration from South Carolina to Pickens County, Alabama. They probably took the old federal road from Georgia into Alabama for part of the time, and this was like a modern day highway for our ancestors. Of course, the road wasn't paved and would have been muddy in the rain and dusty in dry weather. And then deep ruts in the road would have made for a bumpy road, and many people probably walked rather than riding in the wagon.
Well, sometime after 1850, the Welch family migrated further west to Texas, and by 1865, Melissa had made her way to Burleson County, Texas, where she married John C. Harris. She had 4 babies in the next 5 years: Martha, Margaret, James, and Millie Jane. And then sometime between 1865 and 1870, they moved to the neighboring county of Milam, where the whole family was enumerated for the first time in 1870. Millie was one of those situations where she was born in December, 6 months after the enumerator visited the Harris household, so she's not listed in the census. So Melissa and John Harris just joined all of my other paternal relatives who ended up in Texas by about 1860, 1870. And those years are tough researching in Texas. You know, if you think about it, it was the end of the Civil War. Things were a mess. Records weren't great. And they moved around a lot. I don't think we have one of our ancestral couples in Texas who just stayed put in the same county where they originally moved to. They were moving all over the place, usually within, 1 or 2 counties. They didn't move like to the far east or the far west or south, but they did move, and so it made it tricky. In fact, do you remember this marriage record we couldn't even find because we didn't even think to look in Burleson County? It just popped up as a hint on Family Search one day after my dad had looked for it for years, I had looked for it for years, and it's because it was in a whole different county. So
I was just thinking about that because we didn't know they lived in Burleson at all. And who knows why they went there to get married? Maybe John lived there. Maybe Melissa lived there. Maybe they worked there. Who knows why they went there? Maybe there was a family member who lived there and they wanted to get married at their house. Who knows? But all we had known was that they lived in Milam County and Robertson counties and didn't realize that they had gone there. And how providential. It's funny to use that word twice in one podcast, but the family Bible and the family search hints both were very providential for researching this family.
they were. And I think we sometimes now take it for granted that these hints pop up on Ancestry or Family Search. But back when we were doing this research, that wasn't the case. You really had to go up and look through the microfilm maybe for each county. There just weren't as many things online. And so as it gets easier and easier, maybe we get a little bit lazy because we think everything should be there as a hint for us. And it's not.
Well, and I think those marriage records must have just barely been indexed because it's not like we hadn't searched in the databases for Texas marriages and stuff. So it seems like it had just recently been added when it showed up as a hint.
Absolutely. And we do have so many more things now that are indexed, which is wonderful. We add to that body of indexed records every day, as well as digitized records every day on Family Search. So it's pretty neat.
Well, let's hear a word from our sponsors, findagrave.com. Findagrave.com makes it easy to find the graves of ancestors, create virtual memorials, and add photos or virtual flowers to a loved one's memorial. You can search by name, location, cemetery, date, and more. Find a Grave members add more information each day, so if you've searched the site before without finding what you were looking for, come back and check again. Looking for a way to give back to your community? Download the free Find a Grave app, visit your local cemetery, and add missing grave information to the site. It's an easy and fun way to spend some time outside and help other people who are searching for their family members and friends. Findagrave.com is completely free to use, so start your search today at findagrave.com.
Well, let's talk more about the time in Milam County of the Harris family. Melissa continued having children. She had 4 more children: Paralee, Dove, Belle, and Sophia. A lot of girls here. And, we have mentioned Margaret Cinderella before, which I love. They all had really fun middle names, and that was always one of my favorites, the Margaret Cinderella. It's just fun to look at names, and I love them, some of these names. They're just beautiful.
Right? I was thinking like Paralee. I had never heard that name before doing family history research, but it was so much more common in the 1800s.
Right. And Belle, I think Belle's another one that's fun, that we have a few Bells or Isabels in our family history. But the family at this time, you think about what it would have been like 1880 in Texas, and it was agricultural. John was working as a farmer, and it's kind of fun because there was an agricultural census in 1880, and they were supposed to report what they produced in 1879. And so I took a look at that, and they made 300 pounds of butter, 200 dozen of eggs were produced from 100 hens. That's a lot of gathering of eggs and making butter, which would have been something Melissa would have been doing along with all of those children. So, it's just fun to look at those agricultural censuses and see exactly what was going on this homestead.
That's so great. Well, in 1885, Melissa bore her son, Sam. And on December 29th, 1886, her last child, Doc. And that's my second great grandfather and your great grandfather. Well, sadly, Melissa died just 1 week after Doc's birth on January 5th, 1887. And reading this now, I have researched Melissa's early life so much that it never even crossed my mind that she died right after Doc was born, because I haven't really focused on that time of her life. But how sad. Well, Doc never knew his mother, and perhaps that was why years later he reported her name as Lizzie Welch on his sister's death certificate. His own death certificate stated Elizabeth Welch as his mother. He died at the Eastern State Hospital in Vinita, Oklahoma, where he had lived for the past 17 years. And the informant for his personal information was hospital records that Doc would have provided. Although the name Elizabeth conflicted with the name of Melissa on the marriage record, the 1870 and 1880 censuses, and the family Bible pages, we just reasoned that those were nicknames or perhaps a middle name, so we used the name Melissa Elizabeth Welch in our family tree database.
Right. It just seemed to make sense. She had middle names for all of her children. Why wouldn't she have a middle name? And Elizabeth maybe seemed more like a formal name, and she just went by Melissa or Lissy. It's just one of the things we do. We try to figure out names the best we can. Well, Doc was my great-grandfather, and so I had started with his information. I had that death certificate and saw that Elizabeth Welch, and we reasoned that she'd be in the 1850 census. All of her later life said she was born in South Carolina, and there was a perfect candidate for an Elizabeth Welch in 1850 in the family of Meredith Welch and Susannah Welch. So we attached them as her parents. She was the right age, the right name, the right location, and we continued working on Meredith Welch, but really could not make any progress on the Welch line. So that was one of those we just put by the wayside to pick up later.
Seems so logical. Well, returning to this research later on, I decided to work on the Welch family, and I gathered up what we had on Meredith Welch. We had all these pages that I had printed from a researcher who sent us information about the Meredith Welch family. And this time around, I did another search in the 1850 census for, instead of Elizabeth Welch, I looked for Melissa Welch, because I had noticed that she went by Melissa in all of her early records in the marriage and in the censuses. And sure enough, I found a Melissa Welch living with George and Lucinda and several siblings in Alabama. And so When I researched all those siblings, and I found that they also migrated to Milam County, just like Melissa had, where she married John C. Harris in that area, and they lived there in the 1870 and 1880 censuses, I really started to feel that this was the right family for Melissa. Additional research found Melissa's mother to be Lucindrilla Keaton. The 1850 census just listed her as Lucinda, but then I had found a probate record for William Keaton listing his daughter as Lucindrilla. And so that was exciting because we knew Margaret Cinderella probably was then named after her grandmother. And it really made me love the name Cinderella even more as a middle name for Margaret. Well, this Lucindrilla Keaton was the daughter of William Keaton of Anderson District, South Carolina, and this opened up great new avenues for researching the Welches and the Keatons and furthering the Welch and Keaton line.
Yeah, I think this just really speaks to learning by experience. And also, this whole idea that we deal with a lot of migration, really tracking the family. Where did everybody end up? And finding all those siblings there in Milam County was huge. But we didn't realize that at the time. We just didn't know that was a strategy that you could use. And Welch, I don't know that it's that common, but it's also not a really uncommon surname. So sometimes you don't make the connections even when you see the same surname on a census or in the same area. You sometimes just think, oh, that's just another family. It's just some of the beginner mistakes that we made. But when you finally put that together, it all made sense. I think when pieces of the puzzle fit together, we kind of know that.
Yeah, it's so interesting now to think back on that. And now, if I were working on this again, I would want to follow forward Meredith Welch's daughter, Elizabeth, and see what happened to her because, tracing her forward in time could reveal that she had a different family and children, and you can kind of eliminate her as a candidate for our Elizabeth slash Melissa. But one of the main things we did was decide that her name wasn't Elizabeth. We decided that through some other records, we saw that her name was listed as Lissy, not actually Lizzie, but that it was just kind of a misunderstanding in our branch of the family that it said Lizzie. And who knows who the informant was for Doc's death certificate. I mean, it said hospital records, but it could have been a relative who gave those hospital records in the first place. So we don't really know for sure who was the person providing it. But yeah, I think after we realized that her name in all those early records was Melissa, that really helped us to focus in on searching for a Melissa instead of an Elizabeth.
I think that those two could be mixed up so easily. Lissy versus Lizzie, and going to two different first names. It really speaks to not just taking one little record or one piece of information and then hanging your hat just on that, trying to gather up everything. And when you see conflicts, like this was a major conflict, the name, you've got to do more research and you've got to do more analysis of what you feel like would be the best information. And obviously, the family Bible pages where her name was Melissa is really good, as well as those censuses. Those were things that were created during her lifetime, whereas the death certificates were later by
Right.
children that didn't know her. Doc
Right.
never knew his mother, even though he was the informant of his sister's death certificate, and he put Lizzie on there. So, very interesting. And it's possible, even if Doc was giving the information to the hospital, he could have said Lizzie and they wrote in Elizabeth. You
Yeah,
know?
that's true. That's probably what happened because you know how many times that happened to your dad with his name being Bobby and not
Uh
Robert.
huh.
People would just write down Robert, assuming Bobby was a nickname.
Exactly. And he's in one of the censuses as Robert, and he was not Robert. So that's another thought that we sometimes just don't know if someone keeping the record just decides to put their own spin on the name because they
Right.
know better, obviously.
So true. Well, I had to go look up Meredith Welch on Family Search now and just see has anyone figured out that family? It was always such a brick wall. We tried so hard to figure out who these people were and trace them forward or backward with no success. This Meredith Welch and Susannah, and they had a few children, including Elizabeth. And it still looks like it's a brick wall there. I don't see any progress made on adding information about that Elizabeth Welch born in Sumter County, South Carolina, and anytime past 1850. So I wonder if she's passed away as a child or if no one has researched her life going forward.
And she very well could have passed away as a child, or she could have married and be going by a totally different surname. And if there's no marriage record, it would be really hard to track her. Often, those records where you figure out the maiden name come from records much later in life, like when a child dies who has a death certificate and they name the mother's maiden name. So sometimes in those instances, it can be easier to work backwards from known information, which is
Yeah.
what we usually do, than tracing a person forward, particularly a female, if they've changed names and you just have no idea. There's
Yeah.
no marriage record saying who she is anymore,
True.
because there would be a few Elizabeths out there to research.
Yeah, that's interesting. On this family that I'm looking at, Meredith Welch, and apparently he was married 3 times. And it looks like Susanna Welch died after the 1850 census. And it looks like he maybe married another wife again and had a child who does appear on the 1860 census, but only just with his mom. So it makes you wonder what happened to the father and all of the siblings, because Elizabeth Welch would have only been 15. And I wonder if there was just some kind of plague or something that came through and the whole family passed away. Who knows? Or maybe they went to live with relatives and she took on a new surname.
Right? We had that happen where they're just listed under the name of the head of household,
Mm-hmm.
and they basically become lost in the census.
Right. Yeah. And although I'd love to trace them, I would want to use DNA. And since they're not actually my relatives, it would be pretty hard. It would just be neat to be able to say, and look, this is definitely not the right person because she grew up and got married to someone else and blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. I
But
agree.
I don't feel like we need that with this case because we're so confident in seeing the whole family move together and associate with each other, their neighbors on several censuses. We have Melissa's mother living nearby her in 1870. Then we have all the DNA matches, which was really neat to be able to put that all together later.
Well, and I think going back on the Keaton line and being able to connect that as well was really helpful.
Yeah.
And the naming patterns, the Cinderella, the Liz Cinderella, that's really key. That's an unusual name.
Yeah, and one note on that name is that someone else had transcribed the probate record for William Keaton and had just put the name Drusilla instead of Lucindrilla because the handwriting was difficult to read. But when I read it, I knew I was looking for a Lucinda as the wife of George Welch, and so it was clear to me that it was Lucindrilla.
Yeah, which often happens because we know our family, we know what we're looking for, and the names become clear to us. Whereas someone who's indexing or doesn't know them, they're about as clear as mud. And I've had many of those instances where I just don't know who the heck we are looking at. Well, if I were to take on this project with Meredith and they have an alternate name, Meredith Welch, there are a lot of siblings named here, and I would really look at his siblings and see if there was a migration pattern, follow him forward, because if Elizabeth did survive, you would think she would be going with her family. Maybe there would be something that would pop up about her. So there are lots of avenues for research, but I agree with you. With the DNA evidence, we don't need to worry about it anymore.
Well, hopefully someone will figure out the rest of this research since we have abandoned it and moved on with our correct family.
And I will note that George Welch is still a mystery.
Yep. Still
So,
have a challenge there.
Melissa's father, we still do not know where George exactly comes from or exactly where he fits in with all the Welches in South Carolina.
Of which there were many.
Yes, there's more to do there for sure.
Yeah, and this is another case just like my Dyer project where the trees are all tangled and there's all kinds of different fathers attached to different Welches at that time period. And it's just because there was not a lot of direct evidence. There's a lot of clues, and people have put the clues together in different ways and leading to different family makeups. And I have DNA matches going back to all kinds of different Welches, but at certain points in the tree, I just have to realize their tree is probably just like kind of a guess. So it will be another case of having to do a lot of documentary research to straighten things out.
Right. And one of the things we could do would be to find a descendant of the Welches and do y-DNA testing, find someone who could do that for us, because Melissa had some brothers and perhaps one of them, had that paternal line continue down. So that could be something in the future. Maybe there's a mitochondrial DNA test taker out there that comes straight down through Melissa. I mean, she had a ton of daughters. There should be someone that could do mitochondrial testing for us. But that wouldn't really help us with George Welch. That would just give us information on the Keatons, which we already know. So
Yeah, and the Keatons, we were able to extend back one more generation, but that one still needs to be worked on too. And they were all living there in the South during the Revolutionary War. So it'd be neat to be able to figure out, did any of them serve in the Revolution? There was a William Keaton that did, but I don't know if he's the same one as ours. There's a lot more to be done, and it's exciting to think about the possibilities for future research. And I have traced down some candidates for Y-DNA testing on the Welch line, so it'd be nice to get that done. In fact, I sent out a test to one of them and he never took it. So I need to contact him
oh, so
again
you've
and,
already thought
and see
about
if he
that.
wanted to do that or what happened. So,
Yeah, well, you're already a step ahead.
yeah, well, I was going to use it for my certification portfolio, but then I just decided that I wanted to work on something that was a little bit more solvable so I could actually turn in my portfolio. So,
Good idea.
chose a different one.
Well, it's been fun to talk again about Melissa. I think everyone needs to have a case like this in their family tree where you have to correct something because we learn so many lessons from it. Sometimes we learn the most when we do an oops and attach the incorrect information and then get to go back and figure it out. Hopefully everybody listening has some ideas about what you could do if you have a similar situation or just enjoyed listening to us talk about our mistake. So have a great week, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books, Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at familylocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at familylocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.